Resources Minister Martin Ferguson is the man responsible ultimately for the nomination of Muckaty Station as a potential radioactive waste dump site. He's in our Melbourne studio. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
Martin Ferguson, can we cut to the chase here? Is Muckaty the site for Australia's radioactive waste dump?
It's a site that will be considered if the legislation is approved by the Senate, but it's not a guaranteed outcome because, firstly, if the legislation is approved, my department will not only consult with the traditional owners of the upper land, the legislation also gives me the capacity to consult with the affected surrounding groups. If we then resolve that the site is appropriate following native title consideration, we then have to go through a full independent scientific and environmental assessment to determine whether or not this site actually stacks up.
Okay. Muckaty is the only site on your list at the moment, is that right?
It's the only site that has been volunteered, and this legislation is premised on the Commonwealth not proceeding with any site other than that is volunteered on a appropriate basis.
All right. Well, the traditional owners opposed to the Muckaty site have sent you a letter, have tried to meet with you. They say they haven't been consulted. Will you meet with them to talk this through?
Now, firstly, let's be clear. The traditional owners are the Napa people. The Muckaty Land Trust covers an area of 238,000 hectares. The required site is 10.8 hectares in size, 0.00453% of the whole Muckaty Land Trust area. My legislation, if it's approved by the Senate, will enable me or my department not only to talk to the clearly determined traditional owners of the land in question, but also consult with the clans in the surrounding area that have been affected with a view to also resolving some of their issues. But you've got to understand that with respect to the Muckaty Land Trust, there have been a series of native title determinations and negotiations, I might say, in the past, such as on railways, gas pipelines and mines, with each of the independent clans who had the traditional ownership going their own way because it was their land that they were responsible for.
Though in 1999, Justice Toohey, in his role as Land Commissioner then, was making findings about the Muckaty landowning group, acknowledging, as you said, that there's a number of family branches to the group that share responsibility for the area. And he said that where it is possible to say that members of each of the groups related to a shared site exercise primary spiritual responsibility for that site, with none attempting to exclude any other. In other words, all should be consulted.
But in the end, the determination of what should happen on a particular piece of land covered by the Land Trust will rest with traditional owners of that land in question.
And are you certain that you know who those traditional owners are?
Well, it's been determined by the Northern Land Council, which is the traditional way of determining these issues. It's not been the responsibility of groups other than the Land Council to determine traditional ownership based on anthropological evidence and the application of the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act.
As you heard, that's been challenged now, the NLC's finding there. Have you seen the anthropological report that allegedly proves the Napa Clans connection?
It's been made available to my department, and they are confident that the Northern Land Council has pursued a comprehensive and procedurally fair process. And I might say that was capable of being challenged at that time. But you've got to understand, this process has been going since 1988 in actual fact. Wherever we end up with a site, there's going to be controversy. And I might also say the tensions I'm experiencing at Muckaty are no different to the tensions, for example, I'm experiencing in Western Australia at Broome at the moment with respect to particular groups determining that they want economic development. And what we've really got is an emerging tension in the Australian community where we've always argued traditional owners should be allowed to determine their economic future. But now they're actually making some of those decisions. There is others in the community who are in uproar because they don't necessarily like the outcome.
Okay, what about some leadership, though, from the federal government in this? If the NLC, the Northern Land Council, has done the anthropological study, shouldn't it make it available to all those who are claiming that they have some ownership here to sort this out once and for all?
In terms of these anthropological studies, firstly, they are the responsibility of the Northern Land Council. It has not been the practice because these studies also cover sacred sites and sensitive anthropological evidence to actually release these reports. And that has never been the practice and never will I argue for it because that is the responsibility of the Indigenous community to actually determine their own future. And I might say some of the detractors who are actually arguing against the outcome of this process are those who have argued for those outcomes in the past.
Aren't you hiding behind the NLC here? I mean, why doesn't the federal government get in and help sort this out? As you can hear, as we heard in that report, people are very distressed about this.
There are some groups who are affected who have some concerns, but my legislation actually provides for the government to actually consult with them over and above the normal land council processes.
So when will you do that?
As soon as I have a legislative outcome from the Senate, then I will have a legal capacity to commence those discussions with a view to determining some of those matters.
And you give an undertaking here that you will guarantee to meet with all these people?
I will give an undertaking that my department, in accordance with the requirements of the Act, if it's passed by the Senate, will have discussions not only with the traditional owners of the land who have been clearly established, and they are the Napa people, but also with other affected clans covered by the Muckaty Land Trust, which is different, I might say, to what has occurred in the past with some of these groups with respect to their ownership of the land for which there was a railway built on, a gas pipeline or a mine. So those people are now arguing for a different process on other people's land than has applied to their own land in the past.
Are you concerned about a legal challenge to this site? Because, as we heard, lawyers for some traditional owners against the dump say they've got a strong case and they will fight.
I'm not amazed at such a suggestion. You yourself at the outset of this particular program clearly indicated this process has gone on for over 25 years. It's controversial in nature, but it's about time we as a community in a mature way resolved our problems. 500,000 Australians a year benefit from nuclear medicine. 85% of that nuclear medicine is actually manufactured in Australia. In accordance with international protocols, we have to select a site and has to be selected and built with respect to our repository by 2014. Time is not on our side. Wherever I determine an appropriate site, there's going to be controversy because there are sections of the Australian community, including political parties, who do not want this issue resolved because for them this is a political platform. I have a determination to see it established through proper process. There will be consultation not only with the Napa people, but also with affected clans. But in the end, if this site stands up through due Indigenous processes, if it actually stacks up scientifically and environmentally, then we have to get on with the building of the repository because it is our responsibility as a nation.
When will you make the final decision?
Probably in the next Parliament, because if the legislation is passed in this Parliament, then we'll proceed with the outstanding Indigenous consultations. If the Indigenous consultations prove that the site is appropriate, then I will commence the scientific and environmental considerations. They are independent of me, separate ministers, but in the end, time is not on our side. If there are legal challenges, so be it. The NLC will defend its decision-making processes, but my responsibility is to store our waste. No other nation's waste, our waste.
Okay.
It was always going to be in a geologically stable, isolated area as required by international best practice.